Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kate, this is The Mystic in the Woods, and today we are talking about my top 10 Oracle decks. So today we are going to talk about my quest for the perfect Oracle deck, which is of course impossible to do because perfection is subjective, impossible to attain, and Oracle decks are also vastly different that trying to pick the perfect one is nearly impossible because they are all so vastly different. However, I'm going to talk you through my quest for the perfect Oracle deck, and we're going to go over my top 10 Oracle decks to date. I shouldn't say of all time, but like as of filming this video, these are my top 10 Oracle decks. Now, I use Oracle decks in two ways, and I'm going to apologize for the lighting. We're having one of those like partly cloudy days, so the sun keeps coming in and out from behind clouds. And while I have a light, there's just nothing I can do about that. So I apologize for the changes in light. But I use Oracle decks in two main ways. So one is going to be for clarification, like clarification within a tarot reading, where I just need to help getting into the meaning of that card, or I need more clarification, right? I also will use them to be a part of the message or to be their own message. So I might pull one card and sit with that and journal with that and all of that stuff. And ideally, my perfect Oracle deck would do both of those things. It would have artwork that speaks directly to my intuition. It would have keywords or phrases that are both very specific and also very expansive. And it would have a guidebook that allows me to dig deeper when I want to. So that is the criteria. There is no one deck that actually fits all of that. I've got one that probably comes pretty close. But so that's what I was looking for with this deck. And then also there's just a certain level of like attachment. Like there are decks that I love to work with that maybe don't fit those criteria perfectly. So we're going to go through this. Okay. So we're going to start with we're going to go kind of 10 to 1, but there's no like perfect order in which to put these decks. So first I just want to mention two runner-ups. And that is the Fairies Oracle and the Sacred Rebels Oracle by Alana Fairchild. These two decks aren't on the list, but I do like these two decks a lot. So I just wanted to mention them, that this fits the criteria for artwork and keywords that speak to my intuition, as well as having a really great guidebook. However, I just don't use it all that much in larger readings. I just don't use it all that much, to be honest. So there's that. And then this one, you really have to, for me, this artwork does not speak to my intuition. The keywords are just names, and so those don't help my intuition. I really have to have the guidebook for this deck. And so I do love that deck. I don't use it a lot, and that is why it isn't on like the top 10. Now, one of the decks on my list, though, is the Lantern Oracle. I talked about this in my decks for connecting with the Divine Dark and Shadow Work, and this is a Shadow Work deck. Now, this is pretty new to my collection just this winter. When I was doing a season of very deep Shadow Work, kind of doing that next layer of really deep Shadow Work for myself, and I did really enjoy working with this deck for that. I love the artwork. I do find the keywords and phrases to, again, be both specific and expansive. And then there is the great guidebook for when I want more. I will say, though, I have not used this outside of Shadow Work. And so for that reason, it doesn't have one of my top spots, because I do find the versatility to be lacking a little bit. Now, I believe this deck was like made for Shadow Work, so it was not meant to be versatile. Is my impression of it. So again, like, this is not me knocking any of these decks and saying, oh, this is a bad deck because it's not versatile enough. Like, that's not what I'm saying at all. There are a lot of decks, both Tarot and Oracle, that, in my opinion, are not versatile. They are very specific decks for very specific purposes. But if I'm looking for the perfect Oracle deck, like, I want my perfect Oracle deck to be able to do everything, right? So that's the Lantern Oracle, and I do love that one. Now, this is another one. Let's talk about, because like I said, we're trying to kind of go in the order of 10 to 1 here, roughly. This is the Earthbound Oracle. Now, I do love this one for clarification. It meets the criteria for expansive yet specific keywords, simple artwork that speaks directly to my intuition, especially the more I work with it and get to know it. For me, it doesn't play well with all that many decks. I know that's not the case for a lot of readers. Like, a lot of readers that I know who use this deck find that it plays well with like all of their tarot decks. I don't find that for some reason. But the decks that it does play well with, it plays well with. And this is one of my favorite decks for clarification for that reason. Now, the reason it's not higher up on the list is because there's no guidebook, there is no big meanings. And again, it was designed to be specific and simple and to the point, I think. And I love it for that. So like here we have home, and just in this simple artwork, there's so many layers we can peel away. So I do love this deck for clarification, especially with my Hush Tarot, which is maybe my favorite tarot deck of all time. This is my favorite deck to go with that. And so for that reason, like if I was going to make a top 10 deck list, this would probably be on it just because it goes so well with my Hush Tarot. Okay. Then we also have the Mystical Shaman Oracle, which was on my top 10 mass market decks. This, I'm just going to go quickly through this deck. So then we have the Mystical Shaman Oracle, and this was on my top 10 mass market deck list. I love this artwork. I love the guidebook. The keywords don't do much for me though, unless I am very specific with that card and that card's message in the guidebook. And sort of the same thing with the artwork. I love the artwork. I think it's beautiful. But without the guidebook, this deck is not very useful for me as a reader. And as I get to know it more, like I've had this deck for a while, but if I were to just devote like a couple of months to just using this deck, that probably would change, right? But I haven't done that. So I do love this deck because the messages in the guidebook are very versatile. They give you just enough for journaling and jumping off points and shadow work. It plays well with a lot of my tarot decks, but I'm not going to use it as a clarifier or something like that, especially at this point in my journey with it. Now, the next deck that, the next two decks that are on my list also don't meet the versatility requirement, but I love them. And so this is where we start to go, I have 6 decks left on my table, and I really don't know how I would choose between these. So the next deck is the Magical Botanical Oracle, and I talked about this in my decks for working with the Divine Darkness and for shadow work. The only reason that this deck does not qualify as the perfect Oracle deck in my mind is because there are no keywords, there are like names for the plants and things. And without more familiarity with this deck, because I've only been using this deck for a few months, I think. I got this one this winter too, but you know what? This summer is going by so fast. I've had this deck longer than I think. However, again, this artwork and the lack of keywords means I really can only use this deck with the guidebook. Personally, at least at this point. However, this deck's guidebook is like phenomenal because it has great messages, super accurate, not a too long of a guidebook, but gives you plenty of places where you can journal, where you can take that card's message and apply it into your full spread, or however you're using this deck. And because shadow work is so important for me, both in my personal life and as somebody who helps other people with shadow work, this deck has become a cornerstone of my practice very, very quickly because it feels like the shadow as a whole. It feels like the underworld as a whole for me. And so this is probably like one of my top few decks. I'm actually going to set it over here and we'll talk about like which ones make the top 3 list or whatever at the end. The next one is Divine Muses. And again, this one doesn't technically meet the criteria in that very often the keywords and artwork aren't immediately going to speak to my intuition. I need the guidebook for that. To be become more familiar with each card and their messages. This one I honestly just love. Like, I don't even know why. The artwork is not generally my style. I do love the cardstock. I do love the alchemical perspective that is woven into this deck, which is very important to me. Again, my first experiences with spirituality away from a formal religion were alchemical. We were working on alchemy. That was my first experience working with a coach, stepping into this alternative path. And so I've had trouble finding a alchemical deck that I like the artwork of, that I like the guidebook, that all of those things. So if anybody has like a good one, go ahead and put it in the comments for me. But this deck has that perspective. There are cards, like this is one of the alchemical cards, but it has that perspective woven through it. It's very, like, I'm just looking for, like, here we have lunar masculine, and then we have solar feminine. It's a very powerful spiritual path deck for me. So I would never want to be without this deck, even though, again, I would need the guidebook at this point. And that will probably change just as I spend more and more time with this deck over time. Okay, so then we have Woodland Wardens. Now, this deck was probably on my top mass market decks as well. My literally only reason that this does not take my #1 spot is because the artwork, while beautiful, and I love everything about it, doesn't speak to my intuition generally. Like, for me, Spider and Passion Flower, like, yes, Spider and what that conjures for me means a lot. But the artwork itself doesn't necessarily bring up anything other than general Spider messages for me. But then it says, creative ingenuity as the keywords. The guidebook is great, in my opinion. So it's just short. You get the card reproduction and 1 page. But you get the paragraph and also journal prompts. Or you could use them as meditation questions. You get an upright and reversed meaning. So this deck I have found to be really, really versatile. It plays well with almost every tarot deck I have put it next to. It is beautiful. The keywords are perfect and they match the energy of the animal and the plant perfectly. The guidebook is great. So this is one where I can use it as a clarifier really effectively. And then if I want to do a daily draw from it and get into the guidebook, I can do that also. So I love this deck. And if the artwork spoke a little bit directly more to my intuition, and I've got a couple, like the top 2 decks sitting here do that, it would probably be my top Oracle deck of all time. If that one thing was different. But I wouldn't actually change the artwork on this deck because I think it's beautiful. So there's that. But this is definitely one of my top decks. Now, the next one is the Moon deck. So this deck. And this deck I have an interesting relationship with because it took me a little bit to be able to figure out my relationship with it and how it was going to read for me. It is beautiful. I will say the cardstock, I love it, but it doesn't seem to hold up super well. I should just do a full review of this deck, to be honest. This deck I love because I can use it for clarification in a reading. The key phrases, like this one says, I trust the mystery of life, excuse me. This one says, I honor the natural process of growth and transformation. It can bring a lot into a reading. Especially, what I have found this deck powerful for, though, is weekly or monthly individual pulls for, like, how I can care for myself, or as one of my, like, corner, like, one of my, so, like, I like to pull on the new moon. I have 3 decks I like to pull from, and I like to leave those cards out throughout the whole month. This is one of the decks that I like to use for that. And I have found it to be really powerful for that. So, play as my pathway to joy. My instincts keep me adaptable in the face of any obstacle. This deck makes my top 5 Oracle decks because it is both versatile and exceptionally unique. I have not found another deck that does what this deck does. So even though this is not my most reached for deck, and it is not the deck I'm going to use for clarification constantly like I do Woodland Wardens, the guidebook isn't super deep, although it does have, you get a couple pages. You get the card meeting message, and then you get a ritual. There is just a little bit of meat to the guidebook, and it's just a unique deck. Okay, we're down to 3. The next one on my list is my love-or-hate relationship with the Herbiary and Bestiary Oracles. Now, I have combined them down into one deck, and I have edged them. So this is a big deck. Physically, it is challenging for me to work with because I have put both the decks together. I've said this in other videos, like this is on my top 10 mass market decks. I have like this weird love-hate relationship with this deck, and here's why. I should probably do a full review on these 2 decks as well. The artwork is fantastic. Okay, like I am, first of all, not an art critic. Like I don't have a art history training or anything like that. I'm not an artist. And art is exceptionally subjective. So just because I don't particularly love a piece of art doesn't mean you wouldn't love a piece of art. It's completely subjective. So while I don't have like anything I dislike about this artwork, there's something about it I don't love. Like, I don't love the feel of this deck. I don't know if it's the colors. It's probably mostly the colors. Like, if it had no border and it had, like, a more muted color palette or something, that would probably fix the problem for me. The thing about this deck, though, is that it is one of only 2 decks, the other one which is on this list, that I could read both with the artwork or the keyword immediately upon pulling it out of the box. Immediately, for some reason, the art here speaks straight to my intuition, and I can get so much information out of these cards. The keywords match it beautifully, and then I have the Herbiary and the Bestiary decks combined, so you also have the animal or the plant medicine, and there's information on that in the guidebooks, which are little but have a good little message in them. Second to last deck to talk about. This is the Divine Feminine Oracle by Megan Watterson. This was the first deck I ever owned. And so it really was the one that opened the door to everything for me. I would not want to be without this deck. I know there's criticism about the artwork. I get that. Everybody's art is so subjective. I get that. This is Divine Feminine. So the back of the box says, exquisite oracle decks gathered together. So Megan Watterson has gathered together the saints, mystics, gurus, and goddesses from the world religions who represent both divine beings and human women who sought to embody them. So we've got divine beings, we've got human women, we've got divine feminine characters, beings, people. What I love about this deck is it's across pantheons, yes, but we have the divine feminine figure, so this one is Enheduanna, the high priestess, so she has a title, and then it says, I am one with my soul, and my soul is a legacy of love. And we've got that on there. I can actually get a lot of information out of just that. Even if it is a person or a figure that I have no familiarity with, that I don't know their myth or their story at all. I can get a lot from that. However, I also love her guidebook, where we have, so this is Kuan Yin. We've got, again, what's on the card. We have her story. So we have about 2 full pages of who she is. Because we have what's here and the top of the next page. Then we have when your soul selects her cards, and we have the card message. Then we also have a soul voice meditation. This is a question. This can be a intention for meditation. It can be a journal prompt. And it can also, then it has an intention. I recognize suffering in order to release it. Curiosity breeds compassion. That is what is on the card as well. So I have found this deck to be very versatile because I can use it within a reading, not so much as like a clarifier, but as a piece of the overarching message. I can use it to wrap up a reading, to get a like an affirmation sort of thing. I can use it for personal work with the guidebook. I can use it to connect with specific beings. I love this deck. I just do. I've also had it for a long time, so I'm very familiar with it and the characters and the beings within it. So when I say stuff like, you know, without the guidebook, I have a hard time with Divine Muses, eventually I might get to this point with it. Finally, the closest to perfect oracle deck I have found, for me, is the Illuminated Earth Oracle. Which is funny, because I've had this deck for years, and I have continued to look for the perfect oracle. The only thing about this deck is it doesn't have the nice meaty guidebook for if I want to do more deeper work. You just get about one paragraph per card. So it does give you a place to start if you pull a card you're confused on, which I love. But this is one deck that I could read right out of the box. The keywords, this says resistance. The artwork, this one says fire. This one says relationship. The keywords, specific and expansive, excellent clarifier. The artwork speaks directly to my intuition. I can feel this artwork in my body when I'm doing a reading. It works great on its own. So I often will pull 2 or 3 cards from this deck on its own for a message. I have found this to be an exceptional deck for shadow work, for getting into core underlying patterns, both before or after a shadow work meditation. So I've spent the last few years trying to find the perfect oracle deck. And really, I just circled back to this one anyway. It's basically what I'm saying. For me, I basically circled right back to this one anyway. If I could only have one oracle deck, if I really was like, if somebody was like, you can only have one oracle deck, one tarot deck, one oracle deck, this would be the oracle deck I would choose. This really would be it, the Illuminated Earth Oracle. Even though it doesn't do all the things I would want it to do, but there probably isn't ever going to be a deck that does that. This would be my one deck, my one oracle deck that I would keep, would be this one, I think. In combination with probably the Divine Feminine Oracle and the Magical Botanical Oracle, even though this artwork doesn't speak to me right now. I think with time it will. And this guidebook is so well-rounded. So if you're still here, however many minutes into this video we are, thank you for watching, and I hope you found this entertaining. These are my top oracle decks as of now, and a little bit about my attempt to find the perfect one. So all the links are below for my website and everything like that, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.